The true spine of an empire is not stone, but a line on a map. When we think of ancient superpowers, grand monuments and epic battles come to mind, yet their most enduring legacy is often the ground we walk on. This is the story of the Imperial Road, the ultimate geopolitical technology long before satellites or silicon. These were not simple dirt paths, but the engineered central nervous systems of pre-modern states, physical networks that allowed a single center of power to project its military might, economic demands, and cultural ideas across entire continents. By the end of this exploration, you will understand the hidden blueprint every ancient superpower used to conquer distance itself. We will uncover how a road built for royal messengers held an empire together, and why a network designed for control could become its greatest weakness. What invisible structure, then, truly holds a civilization together? A local trail follows the land, but an imperial road defies it. This distinction is everything. What separates a simple path from the engineered spine of a state is a matter of intention and infrastructure. An imperial road was not a route that simply emerged from countless footsteps over time. It was a deliberate, state-funded construction project designed from the outset to serve a single master, the central authority. Its purpose was not merely to connect point A to point B, but to shrink the empire itself, making the distant provinces feel the immediate presence of the capital. The physical design tells this story of control. First, consider the foundation. While a trade caravan might navigate a muddy, winding track, an imperial highway was built to last. Engineers would dig down, creating a layered base of packed earth, gravel, and stone, a technique not unlike modern road building. This provided a stable, all-weather surface. Standardization was key. These roads were built to a mandated width, often wide enough for 2 military carts or columns of soldiers to pass each other without breaking formation. This was not for convenience, it was for rapid, orderly movement of state assets. Then came the supporting architecture, the nodes of control along the linear path. Regular way stations, sometimes a day's march apart, provided fresh horses for imperial couriers and shelter for traveling officials. These were not public inns, they were state-run relay points, ensuring that the emperor's word could travel at breathtaking speed. Bridges conquered rivers that would halt an army, and elaborate drainage systems kept the road clear after storms, because a delayed message or a bogged-down legion was a vulnerability the state could not afford. Perhaps the most symbolic feature was the milestone. These stone markers, placed at regular intervals, did more than just measure distance, they proclaimed it. Inscribed with the name of the ruling emperor and the distance to the capital, they were a constant physical reminder to every traveler, merchant, and local inhabitant of who built this road, who maintained it, and whose law governed the land it crossed. The road itself became a linear instrument of control, a tangible manifestation of the state's reach. It whispered a simple, powerful message to those who used it: you are now within the empire's grasp. This blueprint for power was first drawn in full across the arid heart of the ancient Near East. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, stretching from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea, faced the ultimate administrative nightmare, governing dozens of distinct cultures and landscapes across millions of square miles. Their ingenious solution was the Royal Road, a feat of logistical planning so advanced it would become the template for every empire that followed. This was not a single, perfectly straight highway, but a meticulously coordinated network of the best existing routes, upgraded, secured, and linked into one coherent system. Its most famous artery stretched over 1,600 miles from the administrative capital of Susa in modern-day Iran, all the way to Sardis on the coast of Anatolia, what is now Turkey. To grasp that scale, imagine a message traveling from a city deep in the Middle East to the shores of the Mediterranean, a journey that could take a merchant caravan 3 months. The Persian state had a different timetable. The true genius of the Royal Road was not its length, but its purpose. It was built not primarily for trade or even for the rapid movement of massive armies, though it certainly served those functions. Its core mission was to serve as the circulatory system for the empire's intelligence and command. This was the domain of the paradasish, the royal couriers. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, these riders could traverse the entire route from Sardis to Susa in just 7 days, a feat that seemed almost supernatural at the time. They operated a relay system of fresh horses and dedicated riders at way stations spaced a day's ride apart. A courier would ride at a gallop to the next station, hand off the sealed dispatches to a rested colleague with a fresh horse, and continue without pause. The message moved day and night, while the men and horses were interchangeable parts in a state machine. This system transformed information into a weapon of control. Provincial governors, known as satraps, knew that any report of disloyalty or unrest could be in the great king's hands within a week, and his response could follow just as swiftly. The road carried more than orders, it carried the king's eyes and ears. A steady stream of imperial inspectors, known as the King's Eyes, traveled these routes, auditing accounts, observing troop movements, and ensuring local officials remained obedient. The constant, predictable flow of authorized personnel made the road itself a channel of surveillance. For the first time in history, a central authority could project its awareness and its will across a continent with a speed that made distance irrelevant. The empire did not just occupy territory, it actively watched and listened to it in near real time. The Royal Road proved that to hold a vast realm together, you did not necessarily need legions on every corner. You needed information to move faster than rebellion could spread. This Persian innovation established a fundamental principle that the speed of communication defines the limits of effective rule. But this Persian system of control through communication was merely the prototype. The Romans would take the blueprint of the Imperial Road and forge it into something far more permanent, engineering not just a network of control, but the very skeleton of Western civilization itself. Their road system represented the apogee of the form, a breathtaking fusion of brute military necessity and sophisticated civil engineering that turned the phrase "all roads lead to Rome" from a metaphor into a literal, physical truth. Where the Persian Royal Road was about speed of information, the Roman Via were about the permanence of power. They began fundamentally as military infrastructure via militares. A legion could march over 20 miles a day on a proper Roman road, a logistical advantage that allowed the empire to project force with terrifying efficiency. A rebellion in Gaul or an incursion on the German frontier would be met not by a local militia, but by several thousand professional soldiers arriving in a matter of weeks, their sandals pounding a rhythm of conquest on stone they had often laid themselves. The construction itself was a statement of intent. Roman engineers did not simply follow the easiest path, they imposed their will upon the landscape. The process began with the agger, a raised embankment that lifted the road above soggy ground. Then came the meticulous layering, a sandwich of stability. First, a foundation of large flat stones was set. On top of this, a layer of rubble and gravel mixed with concrete was packed down. Then a finer layer of gravel or crushed tile, and finally, the crowning surface of large, tightly fitted polygonal stones, creating that iconic, enduring pavement. The road was cambered, curving slightly upward toward the center, so rainwater would drain into ditches running along either side. This was not a path, it was a built environment designed to last for centuries. And it served a purpose far greater than moving armies. These roads became the arteries of a unified economic body. Tax grain from Egypt, olive oil from Hispania, and silver from Britannia all flowed along these stone channels toward the capital, feeding the city of 1 million people and filling the state's coffers. But the flow was not one way. Along these same roads traveled the agents of Roman culture, law, and urban life. Veterans retiring to coloniae or planned towns brought Roman customs with them. Magistrates traveled to administer a standardized legal code, the very design of provincial cities with their forums, baths, and temples was a blueprint that rolled out along the road network. The road was the delivery system for a complete package of Romanness. This is why all roads lead to Rome was a statement of political and economic gravity. Every milestone measured distance to the golden milestone in the Roman Forum, the symbolic center of the world. Every merchant's journey, every official's tour, every legion's campaign reinforced the magnetic pull of the capital. The road network physically wired the provinces to the central processor of empire, making the distant feel proximate and the foreign feel integrated. It was the ultimate tool for turning conquered territory into Roman space, proving that an empire could be built not only with the sword, but with the surveyor's line and the engineer's level. While Rome's engineers flattened hills, another empire achieved the impossible by building its roads straight up them. Far across the world, in the breathtaking and brutal landscape of the Andes Mountains, the Inca Empire constructed the Qhapaq Ñan, or Royal Road, a network that stands as perhaps the most audacious feat of pre-modern engineering on the planet. This was not a system designed for chariots or carts, for the Inca had no wheeled vehicles and no draft animals. Their challenge was vertical, conquering a world of cloud-scraping peaks, deep ravines, and unstable slopes. Their solutions were born of sheer necessity and profound ingenuity. Where a Roman road would cut through a hill, the Inca road often became the hill itself, with masterful stone stairways ascending cliff faces. They carved tunnels through solid rock where a path could not cling to the outside. Their most legendary innovations were the bridges. Over roaring mountain rivers and dizzying gorges, they wove suspension bridges from nothing but braided grass fibers. These structures, rebuilt annually by local communities as a form of tax labor, could sway in the high-altitude wind but were strong enough to support columns of soldiers and llama caravans. This network was the literal lifeline of a society organized completely differently from Rome or Persia. The Inca economy was not based on markets and currency, but on a system of state-led redistribution and reciprocal labor. The Qhapaq Ñan was the physical conveyor belt for this entire system. Along its high-altitude routes flowed not coins but carefully managed state goods, maize from the fertile valleys, wool and exquisite textiles from state workshops and fine pottery. More importantly, it moved people. A labor tax system called the mitre required communities to send workers for state projects, from farming imperial lands to building these very roads. The highway ensured these workers could be mobilized and deployed across the empire's staggering terrain. To manage this vast vertical realm, the Inca developed a communication system that perfectly mirrored the Persian model, yet emerged in total isolation. This was the chasqui network. At intervals of about 1.5 miles along the road, small stone huts housed 2 relay runners. When a messenger approached, shouting to alert the next runner, he would hand off his memorized oral message or a bundle of knotted cords called a quipu, which encoded information. The fresh runner would then sprint to the next station. In this way, a message could travel up to 150 miles in a single day, from the capital of Cusco to the farthest reaches of the empire. It was a breathtakingly efficient human telegraph, proving that the need for rapid imperial communication was a universal problem, demanding convergent solutions across continents. The Qhapaq Ñan demonstrates that an imperial road is not defined by the technology available, but by the will of the state to overcome geography itself. Where others might see an impassable mountain range, the Inca saw a highway. Yet the greatest road network in human history was not built of stone but of imperial will. While the Romans paved their way across Europe and the Inca scaled the Andes, the rulers of ancient China undertook a project of unification so profound it would shape a civilization for 2,000 years. Following the brutal wars of the Warring States period, the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, faced a monumental task: how to weld a collection of rival kingdoms into a single, cohesive state. His answer, like so many empire builders, was to physically connect his new domain. But the Chinese approach was one of obsessive standardization, an attempt to impose perfect, uniform order upon the chaos of the landscape. The most famous symbol of this was the standardization of writing and currency, but the most practical was the standardization of the axle. Imperial decree mandated a uniform axle width for all carts and chariots. This was not a minor detail of transportation, it was a stroke of logistical genius. Now, every vehicle in the empire could travel on the same roads without getting stuck, and more importantly, those roads would wear into permanent, parallel ruts exactly the width of the imperial standard. The state was literally carving its control into the earth itself. To support this system, the Qin and later the Han dynasties constructed the Kaidao, or straight roads. These were not mere paths of least resistance, they were engineered speedways for state business. Built with rammed earth foundations and often lined with trees for stability and shade, these roads were designed to run as straight as possible from administrative center to administrative center, bypassing winding local trails. They were the empire's dedicated express lanes, reserved for government couriers, military units, and tax officials. A messenger on a Kaidao could cover staggering distances, with some records suggesting up to 300 miles in a single day using relay stations much like the Persian system. This domestic network served as the invisible spine for China's most famous external project, the Silk Road. We often imagine the Silk Road as a single, romantic caravan trail winding through deserts and mountains. In reality, it was a fragile, dangerous series of trade routes across the steppe and Central Asia. Its survival depended entirely on the security and supplies provided by the Chinese state from within its own borders. The Imperial Road Network was the critical lifeline that made long-distance trade possible. Tax grain and supplies collected from the fertile interior could be efficiently transported along the Kaidao to the frontier garrison towns like Dunhuang. These supplies fed and paid the soldiers who guarded the passes and patrolled the edges of the Taklamakan Desert, keeping the trade routes open for merchants. Without this reliable domestic pipeline, the Great Wall would have been manned by starving, unpaid troops, and the Silk Road would have collapsed. Furthermore, the roads enabled the precise machinery of the Chinese state. Census takers could travel efficiently to every village to count households and assess wealth. Tax collectors, following set routes and schedules, could reliably gather the grain and silk that fueled the imperial treasury. Most crucially, when a threat emerged on the northern frontier, be it Qing, new confederations or other nomadic groups, troops from the interior could be mobilized and marched with shocking speed along these straight roads to reinforce the border. The road network turned the vast geography of China into a manageable administrative grid. It allowed the emperor in Chang'an to not only project power to his frontiers, but to reliably extract the resources from his heartland needed to sustain that projection. The glittering silks and exotic spices that traveled west were not just products of Chinese craft. They were the output of a logistical system so effective it could support commerce across a continent. The true wonder of the Silk Road begins not in the desert, but in the ordered, regimented efficiency of the imperial road that carried its sustenance to the very edge of the map. Yet the story of imperial roads is not confined to mountains or deserts. It also unfolded across the lush river valleys and dense forests of the Indian subcontinent. Here, under the Mauryan Empire in the 3rd century before the Common Era, another vast state mastered the art of continental connection. The visionary ruler Ashoka, presiding over an empire stretching from modern-day Afghanistan to Bangladesh, faced the classic challenge of binding diverse peoples and landscapes into a single political entity. His administration's answer was a monumental public works program centered on two great highways, the Uttarapatha and the Dakshinapatha, the northern and southern routes. These were not mere trade corridors, they were the administrative arteries of a moral empire. The Uttarapatha ran from the capital at Pataliputra, near modern Patna, northwest through the Gangetic Plain and into the heart of Central Asia. The Dakshinapatha stretched southward, connecting the northern political core with the rich resources and cultures of the Deccan Plateau. Built with care, these roads featured shade-giving trees, wells for travelers, and rest houses spaced at regular intervals, reflecting a state concern for welfare that went beyond mere control. Their primary function was to make the emperor's will instantly present in every province. Along these smooth, maintained routes traveled the emperor's agents, the Dhamma Mahamatas. These were not just tax collectors or military officers, they were special commissioners of morality and law, dispatched by Ashoka after his transformative conversion to Buddhism. Their mission was to circulate throughout the empire, ensuring local officials governed justly, resolving disputes, and promoting the emperor's new ethical code, the Dhamma, which emphasized non-violence, respect for all life, and social harmony. The highways allowed these inspectors to appear without warning, making the central authorities' gaze both benevolent and inescapable. But the road's most enduring impact was as a vector for an idea. Following Ashoka's personal transformation after the sorrows of a major war, he embarked on a remarkable campaign not of conquest, but of spiritual propagation. He had his edicts carved on pillars and rock faces, placed prominently along these very roadways. Travelers, merchants, and pilgrims moving between the Uttarapatha and Dakshinapatha would encounter these public pronouncements, which preached tolerance, kindness to animals, and respect for other religious sects. More importantly, the roads themselves facilitated the journeys of Buddhist monks and missionaries. With safe passage and reliable infrastructure, these emissaries could carry the teachings of Buddhism from the Gangetic heartland deep into Sri Lanka to the south, and through Central Asia to the northwest along the Silk routes. The Mauryan highways became the channels through which a pacifist ideology, born from an emperor's remorse, flowed across a continent. This reveals a profound evolution in the purpose of imperial infrastructure. A road built for control could be repurposed for compassion. A network designed to project power could also disseminate peace. The stone and earth carried more than soldiers and tax grain. They carried the possibility of a shared moral universe, proving that the true destination of an imperial road was not always a place, but sometimes a state of mind. The ultimate purpose of every imperial road was to move a soldier. While these networks enabled trade, communication, and cultural exchange, their foundational logic was always strategic and often defensive. They transformed a sprawling, vulnerable territory into a fortified organism with a rapid immune response. An empire's greatest fear was not a foreign invasion at a single point, but a simultaneous rebellion across multiple provinces. The road network was the antidote to this paralysis, creating what military theorists call interior lines of communication. Imagine a starfish with a capital at the center and each arm a road stretching to a distant province. From that central hub, the state could pivot its strength along these hardened arteries, rushing forces from a peaceful sector to a sudden flashpoint long before a local revolt could solidify or an external enemy could penetrate deeply. This was the engine of enforced peace, the Pax Romana or the Pax Inca, which was less about universal harmony and more about the undeniable certainty of swift retribution. The Roman legion, trained to build as well as fight, could march over 20 miles in a single day on their own engineered highways, a pace that would exhaust and scatter a less disciplined force. This meant a crisis in Britannia could be answered by veteran troops from Germania, arriving in weeks rather than months. The road did not just carry the army, it multiplied its effective presence, making one legion seem to be in 10 places at once through its potential for rapid relocation. In the Andes, the Inca used their vertiginous Qhapaq Ñan for the same crushing purpose. When a subject culture rebelled, runners on the chasqui network would speed the news to Cusco. Almost immediately, units of the Imperial army, lightly equipped and acclimated to the altitude, would begin a forced march along the stone stairways and over the swaying grass bridges. Their ability to descend from the highlands into restive valleys with shocking speed was a powerful psychological weapon, making resistance seem futile. The road neutralized the defenders' traditional advantage of knowing the local terrain, because the state now owned the fastest route through it. This logistical supremacy allowed empires to maintain smaller, professional standing armies, because those armies could be concentrated and deployed with maximum efficiency. A province might see only a token garrison in quiet times, but every local leader knew that the road leading to their town was a direct channel through which overwhelming force could arrive at a moment's notice. The road itself became a silent, permanent garrison, a monument not to travel but to control. It whispered a constant reminder that peace was not a given, but a condition actively enforced by the state's ability to project violence faster than chaos could spread. This was the core transaction of imperial rule, the trade of local autonomy for the security that only a central power connected by stone and will could guarantee. The second vital artery of empire carried not soldiers but secrets. For a central authority ruling a continent, timely information was a currency more valuable than gold or silver. An imperial road was at its heart an information highway, a physical network designed to shrink time itself so that the mind of the state could react to events happening weeks of travel away. This system transformed the sprawling geography of an empire into a manageable, almost intimate, administrative unit. The most vivid expression of this was the imperial courier system, a human internet that operated with breathtaking efficiency across vastly different cultures. We have already glimpsed the Persian paradisish and the Inca chasqui, but the Romans perfected the institution with the cursus publicus, the public course. This was not a postal service for private citizens, but a state-owned and operated logistics machine. Along the major roads, a network of way stations, called mutations for changing horses and mansions for overnight rest, were spaced at precise intervals. A government courier carrying an official dispatch sealed with imperial authority could demand a fresh horse at any of these points, allowing him to maintain a gallop for distances that would kill a single animal. A message could travel from the frontier of Britannia to Rome in about a month, a speed that was revolutionary for its time. The intelligence that flowed along these channels was the lifeblood of imperial survival. A report of a poor harvest in Egypt carried swiftly to Rome, allowed the grain dole to be adjusted from other provinces to prevent famine and unrest in the capital. News of a tribal gathering beyond the Rhine would trigger the preemptive movement of legions from their winter quarters. Most crucially, word of a provincial governor contemplating rebellion or misusing funds could reach the emperor's ears before that governor could consolidate his power. The road carried the state's eyes and ears, making the threat of oversight constant and immediate. This flow of information ran in two directions. From the center flowed the binding commands of the state, imperial decrees carved on bronze or written on papyrus. These documents announced new laws, tax rates, imperial succession, and declarations of war or peace. They were the physical manifestation of the ruler's will, and their rapid, reliable delivery was essential to maintaining a unified legal and political space. In the other direction, from the provinces to the capital, traveled the raw data of empire, census rolls detailing population and wealth for taxation, agricultural yield reports, military readiness assessments, and judicial summaries from local magistrates. This constant stream of bureaucratic information allowed a surprisingly small central administration in places like Rome or Chang'an to micromanage a continent. A clerk in a palace surrounded by scrolls could know the approximate number of olive trees in a distant valley or the strength of a garrison on a remote desert frontier. The road made centralized bureaucracy possible over distances that should have made it impossible. It turned the chaos of a vast, diverse realm into columns of manageable statistics. Without this circulatory system for information, an empire would be blind, deaf, and paralyzed, a giant unable to feel its own limbs or coordinate their movement. The true power resided not in the stone of the road, but in the words it carried with such relentless speed. A road built for soldiers and secrets also carries the wealth of nations. The third and perhaps most vital function of these networks was as the economic bloodstream of empire, pumping resources from the farthest provinces directly to the heart of the state. This was not about free trade in a modern sense, but about a highly controlled system of extraction and redistribution, turning geography into a machine for generating imperial power. By dramatically lowering the cost of moving goods over long distances, these engineered highways made it feasible for a central authority to tax in kind, collecting the actual produce of the land rather than just coins. Think of the Roman annona, the massive grain supply for the city of Rome. Each year, thousands of tons of wheat from Egypt and North Africa had to cross the Mediterranean, but the final journey from the Italian ports to the capital's granaries happened on the Roman roads. Without those paved, reliable routes, the grain would spoil in carts stuck in the mud, and the million inhabitants of Rome would face famine. The road transformed a potential logistical nightmare into a predictable, manageable pipeline. This principle applied everywhere. The Inca, masters of vertical integration, used the Qhapaq Ñan to move goods between completely different ecological zones. Maize from warm valleys, wool from high-altitude alpaca herds, and freeze-dried potatoes from the mountain slopes would all flow along the network to state warehouses called kolkha. From these stockpiles, the imperial administration could feed armies on campaign, supply laborers on state projects, or provide relief in times of local shortage. The road allowed the empire to act as a single economic body, moving surplus from where it was grown to where it was needed, smoothing out the inequalities of geography itself. Control, of course, required checkpoints. Strategically placed customs posts and toll stations lined these routes, not as mere revenue collectors, but as instruments of economic policy. In the Roman world, a merchant moving goods from Gaul to Italy would encounter the portoria, customs duties collected at provincial borders. These stations, often located at bridges or mountain passes, were where the state took its cut and monitored what was moving. More important were the state granaries, the horia. These massive, fortified warehouses stood at key junctions and in major cities. They were the tangible evidence of the state's economic reach, where tax grain was stored, measured, and redistributed. Their presence guaranteed that the wealth flowing along the road did not simply enrich local middlemen, but was systematically funneled into the imperial treasury and supply system. The road made the entire empire legible and taxable. A census taker could walk or ride to the most remote village to assess its wealth. Tax collectors, following a set circuit, could arrive with the certainty of the seasons to collect their due in cloth, grain, or labor. This regular, predictable extraction was only possible because the infrastructure existed to carry those bulky, heavy goods away. The imperial road was the essential link between the farmer in his field and the emperor in his palace, a physical chain of obligation that turned local harvests into imperial grandeur and military might. It proved that the true treasure of an empire was not buried in the ground, but could be summoned to walk, roll, and flow along the stone pathways it commanded. But this grand vision of control depended on a single, humble innovation repeated every 10 or 15 miles, the way station. These were not just rest stops, they were the beating hearts of the Imperial network, the microscopic nodes where abstract state power became a tangible, daily reality. To travel an imperial road was to move from one state-controlled bubble to the next, never truly leaving the empire's grasp. The Persian system relied on the stathmos, a fortified relay post where the royal courier, breathless and dust-covered, would exchange his exhausted horse for a fresh one in a matter of moments. Here, a dedicated stablemaster and a small garrison ensured that the king's messages never slowed. But the stathmos was more than a pit stop, it was a local seat of authority. Its commander was an agent of the central government, a listening post in a potentially rebellious landscape, reporting on local conditions and the movements of any unauthorized travelers who dared to use the royal highway for their own purposes. The Roman system refined this into a two-tier hierarchy that reveals their genius for bureaucracy. For a simple change of horse, a rider would stop at a mutatio, a small, functional station with fresh mounts and a blacksmith. But for overnight rest, there was the mansio. This was a substantial complex, a state run in with stables, storerooms, a bathhouse, and secure lodging. A traveling official would present his diploma, a bronze passport, to the station master to gain access to these services, which were not available to the general public. The mansio was a fortress of officialdom in the wilderness, a place where tax collectors could sleep with their records safe, where imperial spies could gather local gossip, and where the governor's edicts were posted for all authorized travelers to see. It physically separated the state's personnel from the populace, creating a privileged class defined by their right to use this infrastructure. High in the Andes, the Inca built their own version, the tambo. These stone structures, strategically placed a day's walk apart along the Qhapaq Ñan, served the needs of the chasqui runners and state officials. They were stocked from state warehouses with food, clothing, and weapons, all meticulously recorded on quipu accounting cords. A tambo was not a public inn, it was a logistical node in a command economy, ensuring that those on state business were fed, equipped, and ready to move at a moment's notice. Its keeper was a local administrator responsible for maintaining the supplies and reporting any unusual activity along his stretch of road. In each of these empires, the way station performed a dual, crucial function. On one hand, it provided the essential fuel for the state's circulatory system, fresh animals, food, and shelter, enabling the relentless speed of imperial communication and troop movement. On the other, it was a miniature fortress of control. It was a garrison that could police the road, a customs post that could tax goods, and a surveillance hub that monitored everyone who passed. It enforced the state's monopoly on speed, ensuring that only those with the proper seal, the correct diploma, or the memorized state message could access the fast lane. The Grand Imperial Highway, in the end, was only as strong as the chain of these small, watchful way stations that lined it, each one a silent sentinel reminding every traveler exactly whose road they were on. A river is the ultimate natural boundary, a line of moving chaos that divides one bank from another. To build a bridge across it was not merely an engineering feat, it was an act of political and spiritual sovereignty, a permanent statement that the empire's order could tame even the wildest forces of nature. These structures became the most potent symbols on the entire imperial network, declaring that the state's reach was not conditional on geography. The Romans built their bridges of stone, massive arched monuments meant to last for millennia, anchoring their roads and their law firmly to both sides of the Tiber, the Rhine, or the Danube. Each stone arch was a promise of permanence, telling local tribes that Rome was here to stay, and that its legions could cross at will in any season. High in the Andes, the Inca faced a different challenge, roaring torrents in deep gorges where stone was impractical. Their answer was the arroya, a suspension bridge woven from nothing but grass fibers. These swaying, living structures, rebuilt annually by communities as a sacred duty, were no less a symbol of control. They demonstrated the empire's ability to organize labor and expertise to conquer spaces that seemed utterly impassable, binding mountain peaks together under a single sovereign will. In China, engineers mastered the pontoon bridge, a flexible line of boats lashed together across mighty rivers like the Yellow River. This was a bridge that could be assembled or dismantled relatively quickly, a strategic tool that allowed imperial armies to project force across a barrier but could also be withdrawn to hinder an advancing enemy. Each of these solutions, in stone, fiber, or floating timber, served the same profound purpose. To bridge a river was to erase a natural frontier, to physically stitch two pieces of territory into one administrative whole. It declared that the flow of tax goods, marching soldiers, and royal decrees would not be interrupted by something as mundane as water. The bridge made the road, and thus the empire, continuous. Yet this very continuity highlights its opposite, the places where the engineered road simply ended. Beyond the last stone bridge or the final maintained way station lay the true frontier, a zone where imperial power faded from absolute control to mere influence. Here, the paved highway might dissolve into a muddy track, the regular milestones would cease, and the safe, state-run mansio would be replaced by an uncertain campsite. This transition was not an accident, it was a calculated boundary. Maintaining such expensive infrastructure required constant investment of labor and military protection. An empire would only build where it could reliably assert sovereignty and extract enough value to justify the cost. The frontier, therefore, was often defined by an absence of bridges. A river without a permanent crossing remained a formidable obstacle, slowing armies and complicating supply lines, making it a natural buffer zone. The Roman limes, for instance, often used major rivers like the Rhine and Danube as borders, with fortified bridges at key crossing points. The lands beyond were not worth the immense effort of full integration, so the empire's architectural will stopped at the water's edge. In this light, the Imperial Road Network appears not as an endless web, but as a deliberate circulatory system with a clear perimeter. Its termini were like the capillaries of a body, reaching out to the edges but not beyond. The road did not venture into terra incognita, it created a hardened, manageable interior. Traveling from the heart of the empire to its fringe was a journey from the predictable rhythm of stone paving to the uncertainty of the uncharted path, a physical experience of moving from the realm of law into the realm of contingency. This stark contrast between the bridged river and the roadless wilderness reveals the final logic of these networks. They were not about exploration, but about consolidation. They existed to define and fortify a contained space, making everything within it legible, taxable, and secure. The empire built bridges to deny the power of natural boundaries, and it ended roads to create new ones, proving that sovereignty is ultimately a story written not on maps, but in the very soil and stone beneath our feet. A state that cannot measure its territory cannot truly rule it. This is where the cold, precise logic of bureaucracy met the physical reality of the Imperial Road, transforming it from a path into a quantified instrument. The most iconic symbol of this transformation is the Roman milestone, the milarium. These were not simple signposts, they were cylindrical stone columns, often taller than a person, planted at intervals of 1 Roman mile, roughly 4,850 English feet, along every major highway. Their surface was a public announcement. Carved into the stone were the names and titles of the reigning emperor, the official who funded that section of road, and most importantly, the exact distance to the next major town and to the golden milestone in the Roman Forum. To stand before one was to receive a direct numerical message from the state. You are precisely this far from the center of the world. This was logistics made monumental. For a military tribune planning a march, the milestones provided an infallible countdown, allowing him to calculate supply needs and arrival times to the day. For a merchant, they turned a risky journey into a calculable venture. He could now price his goods based on a known, standardized distance, but beyond utility, they were pure propaganda. Every time a traveler rested a hand on that cool stone, he was touching the emperor's name, reinforcing the idea that this orderly, measurable world was a gift of imperial authority. The Roman genius was to make administration visible and permanent. Other empires, separated by continents, arrived at the same essential tool. Along the Royal Road of Persia, though fewer physical markers survive, the Greek historian Herodotus describes a system of parasangs, a Persian unit of distance, meticulously recorded by state officials to schedule the royal couriers. In China, during the Qin and Han dynasties, the standardization of the axle was itself a form of measurement, but written records from the time detail precise travel times between commanderies, showing a bureaucratic obsession with quantifying movement. Even the Inca, without a wheel, had the tupu, a standard measure of distance based on human pacing, which would have been used by the Quipu record keepers to log the spans between their tambo way stations. This universal drive to measure reveals a deeper imperial truth. Controlling space requires first defining it. Accurate distance measurement was the foundational data point for the entire machinery of state. It allowed for the creation of the first reliable maps, not as geographical curiosities, but as administrative tools. A Roman map, like the Tabula Peutingeriana, was less about realistic topography and more about diagramming the road network, its stations and its distances, a schematic for power. This data directly fed the tax system. If the state knew exactly how far a village was from a port or a granary, it could calculate with chilling accuracy the cost of transporting its grain or cloth as part of the tax burden. The village could not claim to be farther away to reduce its dues. The milestone was the impartial witness. More subtly, this quantification reshaped how people experienced the empire itself. Space was no longer a vague expanse of hills and forests. It was a series of known, numbered segments. A journey became a progression of counted miles, a psychological transformation that made the vast and intimidating feel orderly and manageable. The landscape itself was being translated into the language of the state, a language of numbers, lists, and records. By carving distances in stone, empires were doing more than giving directions. They were imposing a single, official reality upon the land, declaring that from the capital to the farthest frontier, everything could be counted, logged, and therefore controlled. The true cost of an imperial road was not measured in stone, but in human sweat and time. These monumental networks, symbols of order and control, were built upon a foundation of organized, often coerced, labor on a scale that is difficult to comprehend. The ability to command this labor was not a side effect of imperial power, it was its very essence. In Rome, the legions themselves were the primary road builders. A Roman soldier was as much an engineer as a fighter, carrying a pickaxe and shovel alongside his sword and shield. When not on campaign, legions were put to work constructing the highways that would carry them to the next battle. This was a brutally efficient cycle. The army built the road that extended Rome's reach, which created the need for more soldiers to guard that new frontier, who would then build more road. Alongside these soldier engineers toiled vast numbers of enslaved people, captives from Rome's endless wars, whose lives were consumed by the backbreaking work of quarrying stone, moving earth, and laying the meticulous foundations. Their labor was anonymous, their stories lost, but their hands shaped every mile of pavement. In the Andes, the system was different but no less demanding. The Inca used the mita, a rotational labor tax that was a cornerstone of their society. Each household was required to contribute a certain number of days of work each year to state projects. A community might send its men to work on a section of the Qhapaq Ñan for several months, building stairways or maintaining a bridge, while the state provided them with food and shelter from its warehouses. This was not slavery in the Roman sense. It was a mandatory civic duty, a debt owed to the Sapa Inca in exchange for security and the benefits of imperial order. Yet the scale was staggering, mobilizing tens of thousands of people across impossible terrain, a testament to the Incas' organizational grip on every mountain village. Perhaps the most legendary mobilization occurred in ancient China under the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. His drive to unify the realm through infrastructure knew no limits. Historical records speak of colossal conscription, where hundreds of thousands of farmers and peasants were drafted from their fields and marched to distant work sites. They built not only roads but the earliest versions of the Great Wall, canals, and the emperor's own tomb complex. This was labor on a demographic scale, redirecting the energy of an entire population into monuments of state power. The human toll was immense, with traditions speaking of great hardship and loss for those pressed into service. This capacity to mobilize and organize such colossal human effort was the definitive feature of an empire. It demonstrated that the state could override individual lives and local rhythms for a grand, central purpose. A king could command a single palace, but an emperor could command 1,000,000-person days of labor, redirecting rivers of human activity as easily as his engineers diverted a stream to build a bridge. Yet this very strength contained a seed of vulnerability. These projects were not passive, they were deeply disruptive. Taking farmers from their fields could lead to local famines. Separating families for years of labor bred resentment. The constant demand for workers was a heavy burden that could push subject populations to their breaking point. The very roads built to speed armies to quell rebellion were sometimes built by the hands of those most likely to rebel. This creates a haunting paradox. The infrastructure designed to ensure stability was often born from conditions of profound instability and human cost. The smooth, enduring stone we admire today rests upon a history of monumental effort and sacrifice, a reminder that the price of unity was paid not from a treasury, but from the lives of countless individuals whose names the milestones never recorded. A completed road was only the beginning of the state's commitment. The true test of an empire's vitality was not its ability to build, but its willingness to maintain. For these networks were not static monuments, they were living systems that demanded constant, expensive care. A single harsh winter could wash out a bridge's foundation. Tree roots could crack the finest Roman paving stones. The relentless traffic of carts and armies would wear ruts deep into the surface, requiring entire sections to be torn up and relayed. This upkeep was a relentless financial and administrative drain, a quiet battle against entropy that required a steady flow of tax revenue, organized labor, and vigilant local officials. As long as the imperial treasury was full and the bureaucratic machinery hummed, the roads stayed open. But this maintenance was often the first thing to falter when an empire's fortunes began to wane. A distant province struggling to pay its taxes might quietly let a stretch of highway fall into disrepair. A central government, distracted by civil war or external invasion, would stop sending funds for the annual rebuilding of a critical mountain bridge. These were not just practical failures, they were potent political symbols. An overgrown road where weeds split the ancient stones was not merely an inconvenience. It was a clear, physical signal that the state's presence was retreating. A collapsed bridge across a strategic river was a declaration that the empire could no longer enforce its will across that natural boundary. The road network, which had once pulsed with the lifeblood of imperial control, would grow quiet, its arteries slowly hardening and closing. This contrast in endurance tells a revealing story. Many Roman roads survived for centuries after the empire's political collapse in the West. their sturdy stone foundations so well built that they became the base for medieval and even modern highways. Their survival speaks to the extraordinary initial investment and the robust design meant to outlast the state itself. Yet in the Andes, the vast Qhapaq Ñan network disintegrated with startling speed following the Spanish conquest. This was not because the roads were poorly made, but because the Spanish deliberately destroyed the organizing state that maintained them. They dismantled the Mita labor system, executed the administrative class who kept the Quipu records, and had no use for a highway system designed for foot and llama traffic. Without the Inca bureaucracy to coordinate thousands of workers for the annual rebuilding of grass bridges or the clearing of landslides, the roads were quickly reclaimed by the mountains. The stone stairways remained, but the system died. This reveals the final, fragile truth of these imperial networks. They were not self-sustaining feats of engineering. They were physical manifestations of a political idea. A road only functioned as long as there was a central authority with the power, wealth, and will to command its upkeep. When that will evaporated, the path back to wilderness was remarkably short. The silence that eventually fell upon these great roads was the most eloquent testimony of all, marking not just the end of a route, but the end of an order. The road did not simply stop at the border, it reached beyond it. An empire's influence was not confined to the territory it directly ruled, but extended along the smooth, inviting pathways it offered to those on the outside. These diplomatic roads were a different kind of projection, trading the blunt force of military control for the subtler pull of economic and political gravity. A well-maintained highway leading from the imperial heartland to a frontier kingdom sent a powerful message. It was an offer of connection, a tangible link to the wealth, stability, and prestige of the great power. For client rulers and allied tribes, such a road was both a privilege and a chain. The Persian Royal Road, for instance, did not end at the formal borders of the empire. Spokes extended toward the Greek city-states of Ionia and into the volatile lands of the northern steppe. These routes facilitated not just trade, but a steady stream of diplomatic envoys, royal gifts, and cultural ambassadors. A local chieftain whose settlement was connected to this network gained access to coveted goods, imperial subsidies, and military support against his rivals. In return, he gradually aligned his policies with Persian interests. His economy became dependent on that imperial connection, and his people grew accustomed to the flow of foreign ideas and luxuries. He was not conquered by the sword, but woven into the imperial tapestry by the road. The Romans mastered this art of soft power paving. Beyond the hardened frontier of the limes, with its walls and fortresses, they often built or subsidized roads into the territories of friendly Germanic tribes or client kingdoms in the east. These were roads of invitation. They made it easier for Roman merchants to bring wine, glassware, and coin into those lands, creating a taste for Roman goods that fostered economic dependence. They also made it easier for tribal elites to travel to Roman cities, where they would be dazzled by the baths, theaters, and forums, returning home as advocates for Roman ways. A chieftain whose people profited from this trade, and whose sons might be educated in Rome, had a vested interest in maintaining peace and acting as a buffer against truly hostile forces. The road effectively moved the empire's cultural and economic frontier far beyond its military one, creating a zone of influence that was often more durable than outright conquest. This system turned geography into a kind of diplomacy. A frontier tribe faced a clear choice: remain in the roadless wilderness, isolated and poor, or move closer to the imperial highway and enjoy its benefits at the cost of some autonomy. The road itself became the argument for alignment, a physical promise of a better, more connected future within the empire's orbit. It demonstrated that the most effective borders were not always walls, but sometimes well-paved paths that others chose to walk. A road carries more than goods and soldiers. It carries ideas that can reshape a continent. these imperial networks became the primary channels for the most powerful force of all, belief. An empire could mandate laws and collect taxes, but to achieve true cohesion, it needed to shape how its people understood the world itself, and the highway was its most effective pulpit. The Mauryan Emperor Ashoka provided the earliest and clearest blueprint for this. After the sorrows of a major war, he embraced Buddhism and launched a campaign of spiritual propagation unprecedented in scale. His engineers did not just build roads for inspectors, they built them for missionaries. Along the Uttarapatha and Dakshinapatha, Ashoka erected his famous edicts, pillars carved with sermons on stone that preached non-violence, respect for all life, and religious tolerance. Travelers and pilgrims moving between the great northern and southern routes would encounter these pronouncements, a constant physical reminder of the emperor's new moral code. More importantly, the safe, maintained highways allowed Buddhist monks to travel with unprecedented security. These emissaries, carrying the teachings of the Buddha, moved from the Gangetic heartland south into Sri Lanka and northwest into Central Asia, using the very infrastructure built for imperial control to spread a philosophy of peace. The road, designed to project the emperor's will, became the vehicle for his personal transformation, proving that infrastructure could disseminate an ideology as efficiently as it moved an army. This model found its ultimate expression on the Silk Road, but it was a later, organic evolution. The Han dynasty's Kai Dao, those straight roads built for bureaucracy, extended to garrison towns on the empire's western fringe like Dunhuang. From these secure bases, Buddhist monks from India and Central Asia began to enter China, and Chinese pilgrims like the famous monk Xuanzang began the arduous journey west to retrieve sacred texts. The roads that carried silk and jade for trade now carried sutras and statues for the soul. Monasteries grew up at key oasis towns along the routes, serving as way stations for both merchants and monks, blending spiritual and commercial exchange. The Chinese state, initially wary, eventually saw the stabilizing potential of this foreign faith and began to patronize it, building temples and translating texts. Buddhism did not spread by conquest along the Silk Road. It traveled by trust and traction, its progress made possible by the security and connectivity the Imperial Road Network provided at its point of origin. The highway enabled a great conversation of faith across mountains and deserts, turning a network for control into a corridor for conversion. In the West, Roman roads performed a similar, if more deliberate, cultural function. Initially, they served as conduits for Roman civic religion, the cult of the emperor and the pantheon of state gods. The arrival of a new imperial cult statue in a provincial town, transported along the flawless paving, was a religious and political event. Veterans settling in colonies brought their household gods and rituals with them, establishing familiar patterns of worship in foreign soil. But the most profound transformation came with the rise of Christianity. For centuries, Roman roads had carried persecutors to hunt followers of the new faith. Yet those same roads, with their predictable routes and safe mansions, also enabled the apostles and later bishops to travel, coordinate, and spread their teachings with remarkable speed. The epistles of Paul circulated along these routes, and church councils could be convened because bishops from Gaul, Africa, and Asia Minor could all reach a city like Nicaea using the state's own infrastructure. When Constantine finally embraced Christianity, the existing road network allowed for the rapid standardization of doctrine and the suppression of what was deemed heresy. The physical unity of the empire, maintained by stone, made possible the theological unity of the Church. The road that had once carried legions to enforce the emperor's divinity now carried priests to preach a single, universal God. High in the Andes, the movement of belief was a state-directed procession. The Inca Qhapaq Ñan was the stage for the imperial cult, a physical manifestation of the sacred geography that bound the empire together. The Sapa Inca was considered a living god, and his movements along the highway were elaborate ceremonial events that reinforced his divine status to the people. More strikingly, the mummified remains of past rulers, carefully preserved and considered still alive and possessing kame, or life force, were regularly paraded along the roads. These royal mummies were brought out for major festivals, carried on litters from Cusco to important shrines, and consulted for advice. This practice tied the glorious past to the present, physically connecting subject populations with the lineage of divine kings. The road also facilitated the mandatory pilgrimages to major state shrines, like the Island of the Sun in Lake Titicaca, drawing people from across the empire into a shared ritual landscape. By moving sacred objects and people through the landscape, the Inca used their infrastructure to make theology tangible, weaving the mountain peaks and river sources into a living tapestry of state-sponsored belief. In each of these empires, the highway proved to be the ultimate cultural integrator. It did not just move armies to hold territory, it moved ideas to hold minds, standardizing ritual and belief as effectively as it standardized axle widths or distances. The final conquest was not of land but of worldview, and it was achieved one paved or perfectly stepped mile at a time. Yet the very highways that bound an empire together could also become the swiftest route to its unraveling. This is the profound paradox of connectivity, the double-edged nature of any network. A road built to project imperial power outward could, in a moment of crisis, channel threats inward with terrifying efficiency. The same infrastructure that allowed a legion to crush a rebellion could enable rebels to coordinate across vast distances, turning local grievances into a unified uprising. The Roman Empire provides a stark example. When a charismatic leader like Spartacus rallied a force of enslaved people in southern Italy in the 1st century before the Common Era, their initial success was due in part to the landscape of the Apennine Mountains, which offered refuge. But as their numbers grew, their mobility and ability to strike at will were amplified by the very Roman roads they marched upon. These paved arteries allowed the rebel army to move with a speed that confounded local militias, forcing Rome to divert full legions from other frontiers. The road network, designed for centralized control, had been turned against its creators, becoming a tool for decentralized insurgency. More critically, these intact, magnificent highways presented an irresistible gift to any external enemy who breached the frontier. The Roman road did not discriminate, it served whoever controlled its endpoints. When various Germanic tribal confederations began pushing across the Rhine and Danube frontiers in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries, they did not wander lost in a trackless wilderness. They moved with purpose along the impeccably maintained Roman highways, using the empire's own logistical blueprint to navigate its heartland. A tribe that had crossed the river could now march straight toward a major city like Trier or Milan, following the stone milestones as faithfully as any Roman centurion. The roads that had been built to rush legions to the border now guided invaders directly to the empire's richest provinces and most vulnerable cities. The invaders did not need to conquer the road, they simply inherited it, a turnkey system for their own campaigns of displacement and settlement. This catastrophic co-option reached its most brutal conclusion in the Andes. When Spanish conquistadors under Francisco Pizarro arrived in the 16th century, they faced the daunting challenge of the Inca Empire's vertical geography. Yet their campaign of conquest was made possible, in a grim irony, by the Qhapaq Ñan itself. The Spanish, often lost and struggling in the unfamiliar environment, were frequently guided by indigenous allies who knew the network intimately. More importantly, once they seized key nodes like the capital of Cusco, they controlled the entire system. The royal highway that had allowed the Sapa Inca to muster armies from across the realm now allowed the Spanish to dispatch their own, much smaller, forces to subdue distant regions. The bridges they did not have to build, the mountain passes already carved into stairways, the way stations that provided shelter, all became assets in the dismantling of the empire that created them. The road network, a masterpiece of imperial integration, became the perfect instrument for its own dismemberment. This reveals a fatal flaw in the logic of control. An imperial road is a permanent investment in geography, a fixed asset that cannot be easily withdrawn or erased. In times of strength, it extends the state's reach, but in times of weakness, it extends an invitation. It creates a predictable pattern, a map that any adversary can read and follow. The very efficiency that sustains an empire also standardizes its vulnerabilities, laying a direct, well-paved path from the frontier to the capital. A network built to ensure that all roads lead to Rome could, in the end, ensure that all invaders knew exactly how to get there. The stone itself is silent, but its story is waiting to be read. For centuries, the true scale of these ancient networks was a fragmented puzzle, pieced together from crumbling texts, local legends, and the patient work of archaeologists with trowels and brushes. Traditional excavation has always been the foundation, uncovering the physical truth beneath the myth. A team in Italy might carefully expose the layered agger of a Roman road, each stratum telling a story of repair and renewal. In the deserts of Iran, a surveyor might find the faint, raised outline of what was once a Persian stathmos, its walls eroded to mere shadows in the sand. These ground-level discoveries are irreplaceable, offering intimate details: a broken milestone with a faded inscription, the hearth of a way station where a courier once warmed his hands, the distinctive gravel mix that marks an imperial engineering standard. Yet for all their precision, these digs provide only snapshots, isolated dots on a vast, empty canvas. The connecting lines, the grand continental design, remained stubbornly hidden, especially in landscapes where nature had done its best to reclaim the work of empires. How do you map a road that has been buried under 1,000 years of jungle growth or swallowed by the shifting sands of a desert? The answer now comes from the sky. A revolution in how we see the past began not with a shovel, but with a sensor. Technologies like LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, and high-resolution satellite imagery have utterly transformed our understanding of these imperial networks. LiDAR works by flying a specially equipped aircraft over a forested or rugged area. It sends out millions of laser pulses every second, which penetrate the leafy canopy of a rainforest or the low scrub of a hillside and bounce back from the solid ground below. By stripping away the vegetation digitally, researchers are left with a breathtakingly detailed three-dimensional map of the bare earth, revealing human-made shapes invisible to the naked eye. In the dense cloud forests of Peru, this technology has been nothing short of miraculous. Where explorers once saw only an impenetrable green wall, LiDAR has revealed the Qhapaq Ñan in stunning clarity, exposing long stretches of stone paving, elaborate stairways ascending peaks, and the precise layouts of forgotten tambo way stations, all hidden for centuries. It shows the road not as a disconnected trail, but as a coherent, engineered system flowing over impossible terrain, a master plan written on the landscape itself. From even higher up, satellites provide a different kind of revelation. Their cameras can detect subtle variations in soil moisture, plant health, and ground texture that betray the presence of buried structures. A straight line crossing a modern farmer's field in Turkey, where the wheat grows slightly stunted because its roots hit the compacted foundation of a Roman road, becomes visible from space. In the arid expanses of Central Asia, thermal imaging can pick up the ghostly imprint of caravanserais and fortified walls along old Persian routes, their remains holding temperature differently than the surrounding soil. This God's eye view allows archaeologists to trace the routes across hundreds of miles, seeing the logical, strategic choices the ancient engineers made, how they aimed for the lowest pass in a mountain range or the firmest ground across a floodplain. We can now observe for the first time the continental logic in action. These technologies do more than just find lost roads, they reveal the mind of the empire that built them. We can see how a network was designed to connect specific resource zones to administrative centers, or how it bypassed certain areas entirely, revealing the political and economic priorities of a vanished state. The patterns invisible from the ground, the grand geometry of control, are finally laid bare, allowing us to trace the literal footsteps of power across continents and to understand that these roads were never just paths, but the bold, enduring signatures of civilization itself. But not every empire chose to carve its will into the earth. For one, the greatest land empire in human history achieved its dominance not by building permanent roads, but by mastering the very concept of the path itself. The Mongol Empire, under figures like Genghis and Kublai Khan, stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Europe, a realm of staggering diversity and distance. Yet archaeologists find no signature Mongol highway, no standardized milestones bearing the great Khan's name etched in stone. Their power projection operated on a completely different principle, one of breathtaking fluidity and adaptation. Where Rome or Persia sought to fix and define space with linear infrastructure, the Mongols conquered it by remaining gloriously unfixed, their empire flowing across the landscape like water finding its course. Their foundational technology was not the paved road but the horse, and the unmatched mobility it granted the nomadic warrior. A Mongol army could cover distances that would cripple a settled force, living off the land and moving with a speed that felt supernatural to their enemies. This was not control through permanent occupation of territory, but through the overwhelming, unpredictable capacity to appear anywhere at any time. The threat of their arrival was often enough to secure submission, a form of psychological control that made the very horizon a source of dread for those who stood against them. To manage the information flow across this oceanic steppe, they developed a system that mirrored the purpose but not the form of the Imperial Road. This was the Yam, a courier network of relay stations spaced a day's ride apart. But these were not stone mansions or fortified tambos. They were often simple outposts, yurts or wooden structures stocked with fresh horses, food and supplies, staffed by local communities obligated to provide support. A messenger carrying the paisa, a tablet of authority issued by the Khan, could demand a fresh mount and provisions at any Yam station, allowing him to ride up to 200 miles in a single day. This system created a web of nodal control where the points of contact, the stations themselves, were the fixed elements in a vast, otherwise fluid territory. The genius of the Mongols was their pragmatic use of existing geography. They did not need to build a new road from Karakoram to Baghdad. They simply commandeered and secured the best existing local routes, from Silk Road caravan trails to mountain passes, integrating them into their logistical web. Their empire was a network of people and animals in motion, held together by the constant flow of riders along these borrowed paths, rather than by the pride of permanent construction. This reveals a fundamental dichotomy in how empires project power. Settled, agricultural states like Rome or China sought to transform the landscape, to imprint a permanent, legible order upon it with stone and surveyed line. Their control was linear and architectural. The Mongol model was one of dynamic presence. Their authority was asserted not from a fixed road but from the saddle, and it was maintained by the certainty that the Khan's will could travel with the wind, reaching the farthest corner of the realm with a speed that made distance meaningless. It was empire as a verb, not a noun, a continuous act of movement and communication that required no monument except the open sky and the endless grassland. Their success forces us to reconsider what infrastructure truly means, proving that the most effective network might not be the one you build, but the one you brilliantly, ruthlessly, and temporarily commandeer. Numbers give these networks a voice we can finally understand. To grasp the sheer ambition of these empires, we must measure their reach in miles and their command in hours. The Roman system was a behemoth of connectivity, with estimates suggesting their network eventually spanned over 250,000 miles of engineered roads. That is a distance long enough to circle our planet 10 times, a web of stone that stitched 3 continents together. By comparison, the Inca Qhapaq Ñan, conquering the world's most formidable mountains, extended for roughly 25,000 miles. And the pioneering Persian Royal Road, the original blueprint, focused its might on a core artery of about 1,500 miles, though its full network of connected routes was far more extensive. These figures are not just impressive statistics, they represent a direct equation of imperial capacity. The length of a road network was a function of how much territory an empire could physically integrate and administratively digest. Rome's staggering mileage reflects its centuries-long project of turning diverse conquered lands into Roman space, a process of absorption made permanent in pavement. But length alone does not define power, speed does. This is where the true genius of imperial logistics shines, in the daily grind of the courier. A Roman messenger on the cursus publicus, changing horses at relay stations, could cover about 50 miles in a day. That pace already dwarfed the movement of any ordinary traveler, allowing a dispatch to cross Italy in a week. The Persians, masters of the dedicated Royal Express lane, pushed this further. Their Paradazish riders, using a seamless relay of horses and men, could achieve bursts of over 100 miles in a single day, making the vast distances of their empire feel shockingly small. Yet the most astonishing feat belongs to the high-altitude runners of the Andes. The Inca chasqui, operating a human relay across stone stairways and mountain passes, could pass a message an incredible 150 miles in a day. This was not a feat of equine stamina, but of human organization, a testament to the precise spacing of tambo way stations and the athletic dedication of the runners themselves. These numbers reveal a critical relationship between network density, technology, and imperial temperament. Rome's extensive but slightly slower network reflects a different priority: the movement of heavy legions and bulk goods to solidify permanent occupation. Their empire was built to last, and its communication speed, while impressive, served that enduring structure. The Persian and Inca systems, achieving higher peak speeds, highlight an empire's need for near-instantaneous awareness. Their realms, though vast, relied on the psychological impact of rapid response, the certainty that the king's or the Sapa Inca's will could arrive faster than trouble could spread. The technology chosen, horse or human, was simply the best tool for the specific geography and culture. The Persian horse relay was perfect for the long stretches of the Iranian plateau, while the Inca footrunner was the only possible solution for vertical terrain where horses could not go. Each empire engineered a communication system that maximized speed within the constraints of their world, because the faster information could travel, the tighter the grip of the central authority could be. In the end, the true measure of an imperial road was not found in its majestic stone bridges, but in the quiet, relentless pace of the messenger who moved along it, turning miles into minutes and continents into a single, manageable realm. The ghost of an imperial road never truly disappears. Its most enduring legacy is not in ruins, but in the asphalt and steel we use every single day. Look at a modern map of Europe, and you are often looking at a 2,000-year-old Roman travel plan. The famed Via Appia, the Appian Way, began as a military road from Rome to the strategic port of Brundisium. Today, Italy's modern Strada Statale 7 highway follows its route with remarkable fidelity, a direct descendant carrying cars and trucks where legions once marched. This is not a coincidence, it is a testament to the cold, brilliant geographical logic of empire. Roman engineers did not choose their paths at random. They selected the most efficient, defensible, and sustainable routes across mountain passes, along river valleys, and through the narrowest points of swamps. Centuries of subsequent travelers, from medieval pilgrims to modern civil engineers, recognized this optimal planning and simply paved over the original blueprint. The empire's skeleton became the continent's circulatory system. This pattern repeats across the globe. In the Andes, the Pan-American Highway, that legendary ribbon of road stretching from Alaska to Argentina, often abandons its modern straight lines to twist and climb along the ancient foundation of the Inca Qhapaq Ñan. Where the highway conquers a sheer mountainside with a series of tight switchbacks, look closer. You are often tracing the precise stone stairways built by Inca engineers to achieve the same gradient. Modern road builders, facing the same impossible geography, arrived at the same solutions, proving that the Inca understood their land with an intimacy that modern technology merely confirms. In the Middle East, the dusty tracks that once guided Persian royal couriers between Susa and Sardis have, in many stretches, evolved into the paved highways connecting modern Iran and Turkey. The logic of connecting administrative centers to resource-rich regions and securing mountain passes is timeless, a geographical imperative that outlives the empires that first acted upon it. Even our railroads whisper of ancient pathways. The main rail lines slicing through Europe's mountain ranges frequently emerge from tunnels onto routes surveyed by Roman legions, following the same valleys and gaps that offered the least resistance to an army on foot. The empire's need for all-weather, gradual inclines for marching columns translates perfectly into a train's need for manageable grades and stable foundations. This enduring geographical logic reveals a profound truth about human movement and power. While empires rise and fall, the most efficient paths across a continent are often discovered only once. The initial investment of imperial vision, that immense effort to define natural chaos with order, creates a permanent scar on the landscape, a preferred route that all who come after will naturally follow. We are not just driving on modern roads, we are traveling in the deeply worn ruts of imperial ambition, following the same lines drawn by surveyors 2 millennia ago who were not just building a road but defining the very shape of a civilization. The stone may be buried, but the path is eternal. The stone highway and the fiber optic cable are built from the same blueprint. For all the dazzling technology of our modern world, the fundamental architecture of power has not changed, only its medium. The Imperial Road Network was the ancient world's internet, a physical system designed to move the 3 essential currencies of any civilization: information, value, and force. Its core components map almost perfectly onto our digital infrastructure, revealing that the struggle to control a network is a timeless human challenge. The way station, that fortified node of fresh horses and imperial officials, is the direct ancestor of the server hub. It was a point of processing, storage, and relay where the state's messages were verified, refreshed, and sent onward with maximum efficiency. Just as data packets today are routed through these centralized hubs to ensure speed and security, the royal courier handed his sealed dispatches to a fresh rider at a Stathmos or a Mancio, keeping the signal strong and moving. The courier himself was a living data packet, a vessel of information traveling along a predetermined protocol. The road, his pace, the reliability of his route, and the security of his message were the bandwidth and encryption of the ancient world. And what was carried, imperial edicts, tax rolls, and military orders were the operating system of the state, a centralized platform of commands that every province was required to run. This is not so different from the way a dominant digital platform today dictates the protocols for communication, commerce, and even identity across its network, creating a unified, manageable space for its users, who are, in a sense, its modern subjects. The parallels reveal a profound continuity. Both systems exist to reduce friction and latency, to make the vast feel immediate. A Roman emperor in Rome and a server administrator in a data center share the same goal: to ensure that a command issued at the center is executed at the edge with minimal delay or corruption. Both use hierarchy and standardization. The Roman milestone and the Internet Protocol address both serve to make every point on the network legible and addressable. And both create dependencies. The province that relies on the road for economic survival mirrors the modern community whose commerce and social life are woven into a digital platform. The core principles of network control, therefore, remain stubbornly relevant: sovereignty over the pathways of exchange, the power to set the rules of transit, and the capacity to monitor the flow. We have simply exchanged paving stones for pixels and horse relays for light speed, but the age-old question persists: who owns the road and who gets to decide where it leads? The silence that settled over the Roman roads was not sudden, but a slow, relentless unraveling. In the centuries following the political collapse of the Western Empire in the 5th century, the magnificent network that had once pulsed with imperial life entered a long twilight of decay. This was not a dramatic shattering, but a quiet, piecemeal failure of upkeep. The centralized treasury that once funded repairs had vanished, replaced by a patchwork of local kingdoms whose priorities were survival, not infrastructure. Without the legions to clear landslides or the imperial bureaucracy to organize laborers, nature began its reclamation. Drainage ditches clogged with silt, turning paved sections into seasonal bogs. Tree roots, unchecked for decades, prized apart the tightly fitted stones. The first true symbols of breakdown were the bridges, those monumental stone arches across the Rhine, the Danube, and countless smaller rivers, masterpieces of engineering that had defied current and time, now faced neglect. A single harsh winter flood could undermine a pier, and with no state commission to send engineers and funds, the damage went unrepaired. A collapsed bridge did more than block a route; it severed a vital artery, isolating communities on one bank from those on the other, and making the transport of bulk goods like grain prohibitively difficult. The physical unity of the landscape was coming apart at its seams. As the roads grew unreliable, a strange reversal occurred. The very stone that had been a symbol of unity became a resource for local survival. The meticulously cut paving blocks, so laboriously quarried and laid by imperial decree, were now a convenient quarry for anyone building a fortress, a church, or a village wall. Farmers would pry up stones to mark field boundaries or shore up terraces. This scavenging was pragmatic, a use of what was at hand, but it systematically dismantled the road itself. A highway that had been built to last millennia was being disassembled within generations, its body cannibalized to build the new, fragmented world rising from the empire's ashes. The milestones, those proud declarations of distance to Rome, were toppled or buried, their inscriptions fading. The message was no longer relevant, for Rome was no longer the center that mattered. This physical fragmentation mirrored and accelerated the political and economic collapse of the post-Roman world. The road network had been the substrate upon which a continent-wide economy operated, enabling the long-distance trade in olive oil, wine, and fine pottery that defined Roman life. As the roads became impassable, that economy hyper-localized. A village could no longer easily export its surplus or import specialized goods from a distant province. It had to become self-sufficient, leading to a dramatic simplification of material culture, what archaeologists term the disappearance of complexity. The elegant, mass-produced Samian where pottery gave way to locally made, cruder vessels. Without the roads to move tax grain, the large, non-farming populations of cities became unsustainable. Urban centers shrank dramatically, their inhabitants dispersing to the countryside to be closer to food sources. The city of Rome itself, which had once been fed by the entire Mediterranean, saw its population plummet from over 1 million to perhaps a few tens of thousands. Politically, the decay of the roads made centralized rule over large territories almost impossible. A king based in Paris or Ravenna could no longer project force or administer justice quickly across his realm. The swift legions were gone, and moving any armed group along broken, overgrown paths was slow and perilous. This reinforced the shift to a localized, personal form of power, feudalism, where authority was based on control of a nearby castle and the loyalty of a small group of warriors, not on the ability to command a network. The world was breaking into smaller and smaller pieces, and the decaying Roman road was both a cause and a symptom, its fractured stones a perfect map of the new, fractured Europe. The paths that had once made an empire now led only to its memory, overgrown and leading nowhere. But a road can survive the empire that built it. The Silk Road is the ultimate testament to this, a network not of one state's command, but of many civilizations' collective desire. Unlike the Roman Via or the Inca Qhapaq Ñan, which were single, state-owned spines designed for control, the Silk Road was never one road at all. It was a shifting, breathing composite of countless trails, mountain passes, and desert oases, a corridor of possibility that no single emperor ever fully governed. Its endurance lies in a simple, powerful truth. It served too many masters to ever truly die. When the Han dynasty's power waned, the oasis towns of the Taklamakan did not simply vanish. The Sogdian merchants of Central Asia, legendary middlemen, kept the caravans moving. When the Persian Empire fell, its knowledge of routes and its network of caravanserais, those fortified inns, became a legacy inherited by Arab caliphates and later Turkic kingdoms. Each new power that rose along the route, from the Tang dynasty in China to the Abbasids in Baghdad, recognized the immense value of this East-West exchange. They did not build the Silk Road from scratch. They simply maintained and policed their own segment of it, ensuring safe passage for the taxes and luxuries that flowed through their territory. The road persisted because its utility was decentralized. For a Chinese emperor, it was a channel for prestige goods like Central Asian horses, an event for surplus silk. For a Persian Shah, it was a source of revenue from customs duties and a pipeline for Chinese innovations like papermaking. For a nomadic confederation controlling a mountain pass, it was a steady stream of tolls and trading opportunities. No single state bore the full cost or risk of the entire route, but every state along its length had a vested interest in keeping their own section open. This created a remarkable resilience. If one empire collapsed, plunging its section into chaos, trade could slowly reroute, finding a new path through a neighboring kingdom's territory. The road was not a fixed line, but a flow of commerce that adapted to the political landscape, like water finding a new course around an obstacle. This stands in stark contrast to a purely military imperial highway. When Rome fell, its roads, built for a single, centralized purpose, lost their reason for being and decayed. But the Silk Road's purpose was multiplied across dozens of cultures and economies. It carried not just state decrees but private dreams, not just tax grain but speculative cargo, not just soldiers but pilgrims, monks, and refugees. It was a network driven by distributed demand, not centralized command. Its longevity teaches us that the most enduring human pathways are not those imposed by a single will upon the land, but those that emerge from the shared needs of countless individuals across generations, weaving a tapestry of connection so strong that even the fall of kingdoms could not unravel its threads. Even the most meticulously mapped ancient road holds secrets in its dust. For all we have uncovered about these imperial networks, fundamental questions remain unanswered, turning each archaeological site into an active investigation. Historians can trace the broad arc of the Persian Royal Road from Susa to Sardis, but pinpointing its exact path through the rugged mountains of Anatolia is an ongoing puzzle. Ancient texts give grand descriptions, but the ground itself has shifted over millennia, and local trails have been paved over, erased, or forgotten. Was there one definitive royal route, or a braid of several paths used at different times? Each newly discovered way station or worn stretch of paving adds another piece, but the complete map is still being drawn. High in the Andes, the scale of the Qhapaq Ñan inspires awe and a profound logistical mystery. We can measure its 25,000 miles, but can we ever truly calculate its human cost? The Inca used the mita labor tax, but records on quipu cords are largely unreadable to us today. How many people worked on the network at its peak? For how many months each year were communities separated from their families and fields to maintain a distant mountain stairway? The answers lie not in ledgers, but in subtle clues, the wear patterns on sleeping quarters at tambo sites, the analysis of food remains that might tell us how well these workers were fed, and the demographic studies of villages that supplied the labor. It is a silent equation of imperial ambition, written in the landscape itself. Consider the bustling life of a major Roman highway like the Via Appia. We know it was the empire's superhighway, but what was it like on a typical afternoon? Can we quantify the daily rhythm of this stone river? Historians and archaeologists use a fascinating blend of evidence to estimate traffic. They examine the depth and pattern of ruts worn into the paving stones, which can indicate the volume and type of carts. They study the capacity and spacing of way stations and inns along the route. They analyze finds from roadside rubbish pits to understand what travelers were eating and discarding. From this, they build models suggesting that at its peak, certain stretches might have seen hundreds of vehicles and thousands of travelers on foot each day, a constant flow of soldiers, merchants, officials, and pilgrims that would rival a modern interstate. Yet these are educated guesses. The true cacophony of creaking carts, marching feet, and shouted conversations is a sound lost to time, a daily reality we can only approximate. Perhaps the most pressing modern question concerns the environmental legacy of these projects. We rightly marvel at the engineering, but what was the footprint of moving that much earth and stone? The quarrying for Roman road gravel and paving blocks scarred hillsides. The demand for timber to fuel lime kilns for concrete and to build work camps would have deforested entire regions near construction sites. Did the Incas' massive reshaping of mountainsides for their stairways and terraces accelerate soil erosion in certain valleys? These are not just historical curiosities. They are case studies in early large-scale human interaction with the environment. Researchers now use core samples from lake beds near ancient quarries, looking for layers of pollen and sediment that tell a story of changing plant life and soil runoff. They employ satellite data to trace old landslide patterns that might correlate with road construction. By understanding the impact of these ancient networks, we gain a longer perspective on our own relationship with the planet, seeing how even the grandest works of civilization are part of an ongoing dialogue with the natural world. Every answered question about these roads seems to reveal two more, proving that the path to the past is never fully paved, but always under discovery. Sovereignty is not a line on a map, but a grip on motion. The ultimate lesson written in stone across continents is that to rule a vast space is to control what moves through it. Every ancient empire, from Rome to Cusco, discovered the same fundamental truth. Abstract power becomes real only when it can direct the flow of armies, information, resources, and belief. A king can claim a mountain range, but his claim means nothing if his soldiers cannot reach it. His laws cannot be heard there, and its wealth cannot be brought to his treasury. The Imperial Road was the brilliant physical solution to this problem. It was the operating system of pre-modern statecraft, the hardware upon which the software of command was run. By building these networks, empires did not merely connect points A and B, they actively sculpted the landscape of possibility itself, making certain movements fast, safe, and predictable, while leaving all other paths to languish in difficulty and danger. This is the essence of control, not the prohibition of movement, but its meticulous channeling. The state declared, if you wish to move anything of value, from a legion to a sack of grain, you will move it here on my terms, along my measured and monitored path. The road turned the chaotic, organic movement of people and goods into a legible, manageable stream. It transformed the empire from a vague collection of lands into a functional machine, where the turning of the wheels, the pacing of the couriers, and the marching of the boots could be timed, taxed, and directed from a single center. In this light, the milestone was more than a signpost. It was a unit of imperial calculus. The way station was not just an inn, but a valve in the pipeline. The standardized axle width was not an engineering footnote, but a law of motion. Every bridge was a conquered obstacle, a statement that not even geography could interrupt the state's ordained flow. This control of movement created a new kind of political reality. Distance was no longer measured in miles, but in days, a calculation of how quickly the state's will could bridge the gap. Security was no longer about walls around a city, but about the unimpeded speed with which a garrison could arrive from afar. Prosperity was tied directly to one's proximity to that sanctioned flow of commerce. To be on the road was to be within the empire's embrace. To be off it was to be marginal, disconnected, and ultimately powerless. The empires that mastered this principle did not just build roads, they built rhythms, the steady, reliable pulse of messengers, the seasonal flow of tax caravans, the deliberate tread of legionary boots. They composed a symphony of controlled motion, and the road was the score. This reveals why the decay of these networks was so catastrophic for the worlds they held together. When the roads fell silent and the bridges crumbled, it was not merely an inconvenience, it was the failure of the entire system of control. Movement reverted to chaos, distance reasserted its tyranny, and the centralized machine of power seized into 1,000 fragmented, local pieces. The stone itself may endure, but without the constant, directed flow of life it was designed to channel, it becomes just a relic in the soil, a fossil of a forgotten way of ruling. The Imperial Road, therefore, stands as the most honest monument any empire ever left behind. It does not boast of gods or victories in cryptic script. It simply demonstrates, in the plain language of engineering, how a civilization chose to move, and in doing so, how it chose to govern. The path of power, it turns out, is always paved. These stone pathways were the literal frameworks of civilization. They were not just routes for travel, but the load-bearing skeletons upon which empires were constructed, grew, and for a time stood unshakable. To walk an imperial road was to traverse the spine of a living state, feeling the pulse of its power in every measured mile and fortified bridge. Their legacy is a profound duality, a split inheritance we still navigate today. On one hand, they stand as timeless marvels of human ingenuity, solving problems of geography with an elegance that commands our respect. The Roman arch, the Inca stairway, the Persian relay, these are triumphs of the mind over mountain and desert. They facilitated exchanges that enriched cultures, carried ideas that shaped religions, and created connections between peoples who might otherwise never have met. They were, in their finest moments, instruments of integration, weaving disparate lands into a shared story. Yet the same stone that carried a monk bearing sutras could also carry a legion bearing swords. The network that spread a philosophy of peace was first built to enforce a peace through strength. These roads were fundamentally instruments of domination, designed to extract wealth, impose law, and speed armies to crush dissent. The very integration they provided was not a voluntary fellowship, but a mandated order, a unity imposed from above and maintained by the constant, visible threat of the road itself. This is the enduring tension at the heart of every great network. the balance between connection and control, between the freedom to move and the power to direct that movement. Our modern world is not so different. We have traded paving stones for fiber optics and horse relays for satellite signals, but the core imperative remains mastering distance. Our global supply chains are the cursus publicus of capital, moving resources with a logistical precision that would stun a Roman quartermaster. Our instant communication is the chasqui network operating at the speed of light, shrinking continents into a digital agora. We too live within vast, invisible systems designed to project economic, cultural, and political power across the globe. The platforms that connect us also shape what we see. The trade routes that feed us also create dependencies, and the data highways that inform us also surveil us. So as you scroll, as you drive on a modern highway, or as you receive a package from across the world, pause for a moment. Look past the surface of the convenience. Ask yourself, what are the true skeletons of our own age? What physical and digital infrastructures now define where power flows, and who gets to set the rules of the road? The paths we build today will be the empires the future unearths.